Hello, GNDR members. My name is Dina Dandashli, co-founder and executive director at Management for Development. I will be taking you through a series of videos to strengthen your fundraising capacities as part of GNDR's Local Leadership Academy. I hope you enjoy and can apply and share this learning within your organization and in your community. Now that we covered the main fundraising pitfalls, let's move on to what we can do to make sure that we submit a strong proposal. So first off, let's talk about preparatory work, how to approach a donor. The most important thing when trying to approach a donor and to submit a proposal is to really know your donor. And to do that, analyze past funding cycles. And this includes the types of grantees that have been funded, the kind of projects, what their focus is on, the impact that they've had, and also the funds that were allocated to these projects. This actually gives us a really good idea about the donor's priorities and strategy beyond what's being said on their website or documentation that you might find. Now that you have a better idea and understanding about what the donor requirements and priorities are, get ready. So what does this mean? Well, elaborate a fundraising plan based on the organization's strategic plan. If you don't have a strategic plan, I highly advise you to do that, because then you will know in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, what your organization aims to achieve and where it wants to go. And based on that, you really can extract the main ideas of what your funding requirements will be to get there. Also, really helpful when getting ready to approach a donor is to design an impactful presentation with key facts that you will be talking about to your donor, and that really can present your organization in a good way. And so that includes the number of persons reached by your organization, the funds that you've managed, the partnerships that you've managed to develop over time, systemic impact, etc. So now you've done your research, you're ready. Well, reach out to your donor. What does that imply? Well, identify the key interlocutor. Also, establish contact with headquarters, and where possible, it's highly advisable to reach out to the field offices and delegations in your country or region or city, because it's always best to have in-person meetings and have them come over to your organization or where you implement the projects, so that they can know firsthand the team and also the kind of project that you do and the beneficiaries. And finally, try to fine-tune, identify, gain some insight about the specific priorities, needs, and also budgetary constraints of your donor in order to better ensure the alignment of what you are proposing and you will be proposing when drafting a project narrative, so that it is really aligned with the donor, what it's looking for to fund. Well, as for the prep work per se, when submitting a proposal, once you have reached out to your donor and you've presented your organization and you've been invited to submit a proposal, but also when looking at different institutional donors such as the European Commission and other big institutional funding opportunities, is to do prep work that includes analyzing the regional and country development strategies and also the past funding cycles, so as to have a better understanding of the donor's interests in funding a project. Also, if we're talking about a donor that usually has or publishes requests for proposals or RFPs, well, then start planning and preparing ahead of the publication of the RFPs. So independently of the fact that the donor publishes an RFP, start working doing all your prep work, all your admin work, all your research on the donor, and then so that you're ready or almost ready when the RFP is finally published. Do a careful selection of the funding program. Really make sure that it's aligned with what your organization does, what its track record is, and the potential that it has in terms of securing the funding. Reach out to key contact people for clarifications or insights on the RFP or what the RFP could be if it's before it's been published. And finally, also explore the possibility and feasibility of joining a consortium. Now, in terms of all the admin work that needs to happen when developing a proposal before submitting it, is to really read the RFP guidelines. This is obvious, but so important because you can extract so much information out of the RFP, not only in terms of the priorities of the donor, but also the kind of language that you can use in the narrative proposal. We'll talk about it later. Also, prepare, compile, update any and all the required documents and information. And this includes, depending on the donor, of course, the incorporation certificate, audit reports, organizational mission, vision, track record, past donors, the org chart. All of this needs to be updated, ready to submit with any proposal. It's very useful at this stage to also create a checklist with all the key admin and technical items that need to be ready when submitting a proposal. And this is especially true when you have several people or team members working to submit a proposal so that you have all of the roles and timelines and everything ready to share with them and make sure that you meet the deadline. In terms of budgeting when preparing a proposal, please make sure that you use the provided budget template. And if the donor doesn't have one, just make sure that you're using one that is really can show what you want to do and how much it's going to cost, so as to facilitate the evaluator's work. Also, ensure eligibility of proposed costs, the coherence and feasibility for maximize donors' value for money. This is really important, as I said earlier, because if you're proposing a number of activities, but the cost is really, really high, the donor might think that, okay, well, it might be interesting, but it's not cost efficient, so we're not going to fund it. Also, provide a detailed explanation of the proposed costs, ensuring consistency with the project intervention logic. This means that, so you're proposing this and this activity, and this activity is going to cost this and this and this, and really that there's a consistency and that everything is really accounted for. As for the narrative, really a lot of work has to happen here, along with the budget, also the admin work. The narrative ensure alignment with the donor priorities, and these are usually extracted from previous conversations with the donor, but also from reading the RFP, as I said earlier. So really important, you can get there from it, the thematic, geographical priorities, etc. And also you can adapt the language and the terminology that you can use in the narrative proposal to what kind of language is used by the donor. This actually can give you more points in the evaluation process because they don't have to think, okay, so this is what they mean. No, you're using the donor's terminology and language. And finally, again, correct the templates. The information is correctly presented to facilitate the evaluator's review. Also, the format is consistent with the donor requirements. Sometimes the donor requests that you use their template. And if there's no template but just an index, they tell you, well, you have to submit a proposal that is no longer than 5 pages and written in Times New Roman 11. So if you change it to Times New Roman 10 or Arial 10, you're going to run into some trouble here. Also, very important, do a comprehensive analysis of the background and problem. Why? Because based on this, you're going to develop and present the intervention logic. But the donor really wants to make sure that the applicant knows exactly what the problem is and also submits a solution to this problem. And precisely about the solution, it needs to be well structured and aligned with the donor's priorities. Again, value for money. We're not gonna propose an intervention logic that is too costly and that there's not that much value that the donor can get out of the funding that they give. The log frame. We usually leave it for last, not the best option. Ideally, it should be done first. So when developing the problem section, identify the proposed solution, and based on that, develop the log frame. Make sure that all of the items in the log frame are well addressed, clearly identified, and is smart. Speaking of which, what is the log frame or logical framework? So depending on the donor, and this again, to go back to the donor using different terminology, here we have some examples of, depending on the donor, what they call the different items in the logical framework. But basically the structure is usually the same, only some names can change. And so, for instance, USAID usually, and all of the US government agencies usually talk about goals, but maybe the European Commission usually mentions overall objectives. Other agencies, such as if it talks about impact, all the options is can be vision statement, overall goal, etc. Another item, and we'll go into that particular later, is the purpose of the intervention, which can be called project purpose, specific objective, what the project actually aims for specifically. It can also be called outcome, immediate objective goal, intermediate goal, etc. These are just a few examples. Now the results, as named by the European Commission, can also be called outputs or objectives/results by other agencies. Activities can also be called inputs. So as you see, different terminology for the same concept.